When Burson met me, it was at a COAC meeting that was being held in Detroit, and they asked me to come and so they could introduce me. And I remember him taking credit for hiring me.
Before we get started with the show, here's a quick word from our sponsor, Global Training Center. As trade compliance professionals, you want to make sure that your procedures and documentation are completed as correctly as possible to avoid any delays and possible fines. We provide a range of trade compliance courses that will fit your needs. From in-person or web training to recorded on-demand courses, we can train one or even thousands on your team through your learning platform or on our portal. We can even customize a private session for your team. Go to globaltrainingcenter.com to find out more.
Folks, we're back for another show of Simply Trade in the new year here and for 2024. And we have already started off with some great shows. And today's show is going to be excellent. But Lalo, I'm going to tell you, I am so excited as we are getting into some really good discussion on different topics and getting into the scenario of, what I always say, what's that nugget of knowledge that you need to know to become more proficient, and what's the what's the next action you should be taking to either support or defend a particular situation or whatever. So with that, I guess is that before we get into this, anything that you want to start off with on this morning's show?
No, I'm just wanting to say that this month of January has been amazing with all the shows that we've had. We kicked it off with former Commissioner Burson, and then we brought in CBP with Vinny, your buddy Annunciato, and I'm sorry, I always mess that up. And then we also now on this episode we're having a couple of other heavyweight hitters here that are big in the industry, and I'm really excited. I met Amy at one time where I ran into her in an elevator at one of the conferences, and she had a bunch of people talking to her, and I never had an opportunity to talk to her. I just said hi or whatever, but that was my brief meeting or interaction with Amy. But we've had Cindy before on the show. Andy, I'll have you introduce him here in a little bit. But one last thing that I want to say, because of when this show is airing, it's after January 12th. I just want to tell everybody and remind everybody, if you've gotten this far and you're still on your New Year's resolutions, it's awesome, because apparently January 12th is Quitters Day. So international, not just national, but international Quitters Day, which means everybody quits on the second Friday of January with their New Year's resolutions. So if you made it this far and you're still on your resolutions, stay on it, especially with trade compliance. We always say that whatever you vowed that you were going to change with your trade compliance, do it. Listen to this episode because it's going to have a lot of really good information.
This is going to be fantastic. Well, to your point, yes, we've had some really great discussions. The commissioner was fantastic, and he was very complimentary of our two guests. Matter of fact, when we got to talk with him. But with that, let me go ahead and introduce our guests. We have Cindy Allen has been on the show before. Cindy is formerly with Customs. She was a licensed broker and had a long career there. After she left Customs, she kind of made the gambit with the express carriers, I guess, with DHL and then FedEx. And now she's building her own empire, I guess, is what we could say. And then Amy Magnus is somebody that is very well respected in the industry, and she is somebody that has been I guess you've been elected president or chair of the Brokers Association, probably more than once. Have chaired, I know, the regulatory affairs effort, and everybody always wants you. You walk through a conference and it's like you've got this entourage. Amy. Everybody's wanting, it's almost like a celebrity. And the joke between Cindy and I always tell her I'm the president of her fan club, because she'd walk through and have an entourage. So these are two ladies I have a tremendous amount of respect for. They are fantastic. And man, I'm telling you, don't think for a second, just because I give them accolades, that we have not engaged in some extremely intense debates, because I love talking to these two ladies. Anyway, welcome aboard and all that. Good morning and all. Amy, how are you doing down in? As you just told me, you've moved down to Florida, so I envy you.
The sun is out. It's a beautiful day. Every day here is beautiful. So, like I said, it's the fountain of youth.
I love it. I love it. Cindy, now you're still here in Memphis, right?
I am. I'm still here in Memphis, where it's gray and cloudy outside and a lot colder than it is in Florida.
Yeah, as we would say, it put bumps on a goose in a heartbeat. So anyway,
that's one. That's one, Cindy. We're going to keep tally.
Oh, you guys are so funny. Anyway. All right. So we're going to be talking today about some of the top, I guess, things for 2024 as far as regulatory affairs agenda items. I just mentioned this, Cindy, we told Amy this off camera. We had the privilege of interviewing Alan Burson. So what a privilege to get to talk to him again and go through and my gosh, the guy is so smart. It's not even funny. He's going to forget more than I'm going to ever learn. But one of the things I will tell you is that he was extremely complimentary of both of you ladies. And we had some good discussion. I thought Alan Burson was one that really helped break the logjam of a lot of bureaucratic, lack of better terms, an official term, crap, to get some projects done, get some regulatory affairs items off the agenda and completed and whatnot. So I don't know. What do you think about what, as far as that goes, back in when he was at the helm of customs?
Well, I worked for him. He was the commissioner when I was hired. And as I told you when I spoke to you before, I was actually hired by Dan Baldwin, who was then the assistant commissioner of the Office of Trade. But when Burson met me, it was at a COAC meeting that was being held in Detroit, and they asked me to come and so they could introduce me. And I remember him taking credit for hiring me. He said he personally went out and recruited me from the trade. But that really set me up to be successful within CBP and also within the trade. And he did break a lot of log jams. If things weren't getting done internally, he made it clear he wanted something done. Simplified release was an example of that, where 6-month study was done about modernization, and the official answer was, well, we don't think we can do much. And he didn't accept that. He said, no, Cindy, you have 90 days to figure something out, go make it happen. But then he would clear the path so that you could actually make it happen. And there were so many things. And if you think about what we're dealing with today, ACE, he was the huge, catalyst in getting that done. Getting the centers done happened under his watch. Modernizing the broker regulations started with him, and really pushing that forward. So a lot of the things that we're dealing with, global entry, also under his watch, started with his administration. And I just find it fascinating that just now, 10, 12 years later, we're looking at that and saying, what else can we do? So I'm a big Alan Burson fan. I think he's brilliant. He is brilliant. And if you look at his history, Harvard, he has a very storied career and well-deserved.
Amy, what was, as far as you working in the industry and trying to affect change, I know you were a key factor and have been for decades, I guess. I hate to say it that way, but it's like, good night. You're so influential. All you got to say is jump, and folks are jumping before they realize it because they have so much respect for you. But during that era, I guess, we'll finish it up with Alan. This isn't about an Alan Burson show, I guess, but in a sense, that seemed to be a pivotal time in making such phenomenal progress on all that. But from your perspective, dealing with the brokers, your own, the brokerage company you're working for and all, what do you think about that era?
It's hard to go back exactly there because we've been on a long trajectory, if you will, starting way back in the original Mod Act in the 90s. And for people who may not know, I worked for Customs for 18 years. And then I also had a little bit of experience with the Express because I also worked for UPS for a number of years. And now, of course, I work for a privately owned brokerage firm, luckily, because I really enjoyed that position for 20 years. So I've been around, and commissioners come and go. And with all due respect to Burson, because I do think that he was a great commissioner, but they do come and go. And we deal very closely with the agency, with Customs. And if there's a problem that I see, and I'm not blaming any commissioner at all, it is that they get overwhelmed now, these days, with immigration issues. And as such, and the immigration issues are really serious, by the way. So I'm not trying to, say, immigration. But I will say that some of our commissioners have been overwhelmed with the immigration issues, and they haven't really been able to focus as much as some of us in the trade would like to see them focus on trade facilitation and trade matters. And it's not their fault. I mean, they're just given, to me, it's almost like you can be a pilot of a 747, but can you also drive a nuclear submarine? And to me, that's the difference between commercial operations in Customs and immigration issues. That's how different they are. But yet we expect the head of the agency to be able to do both. So obviously, with my background, I'm more interested in trade. I don't mind having rules and regulations, by the way, but I like the rules to be very clear, and I like the policy to be very clear so that we all have a level playing field, so that we all know what the rules are, and we can get goods in and out of the United States following the same rules. So those are my concerns, Andy. I'm not sure that really answers your question, but I don't look at a discrete commissioner's tenure as much as the trajectory from the original Mod Act to where we are now, trying to get to a sort of new Mod Act, if you will. And yet we are still hamstrung by very old ways of doing things.
I agree. Well, the one thing that I will say, though, is I've watched you in several situations, different committee meetings, conferences. We've had obviously the working group that we participated in, all three of us. And I was always so impressed. Not only yourself, but as a matter of fact, both of you ladies as well, is that as we went through like the entry simplification thing, there were some really intense debates over breaking, paradigms, breaking current procedures to try and come up with something new. And the thing that I really enjoyed about that is that even though we had intense debates, it seemed like the entire group of that working group, we never made it personal on anybody. We seemed to really come together, even if we just out and out just hated the positions. But we always seem to try and figure out how can we come together? What can we find that we can agree on and all? But you were phenomenal in you would listen. And Amy, I think you were such a vital part of that group. But then, obviously you would respond back. And I mean, I will say you and I had some really intense debates on certain things, but we always seem to come together on that. And I got to say, that takes, that is a phenomenal talent, is an acquired skill, is unreal, that your leadership in affecting change is phenomenal. So I salute you for that. Let's talk about, what do you see as the top regulatory affairs type thing that's affecting the industry, the importing, exporting community right now? Let's just, we'll start off with maybe the top 3 things that you see people need to look at. Which one wants to start on that?
I'll start. To me, it's really going to come down to data. It's really all about information, who we get it from, how we get it, and at what part in the process, at what time in the process do we get the data. There is no way that we're going to inspect everything that comes into the United States, physically inspect it. It's impossible. And we can get into some detail about why that's just such an impossibility. So number 1 is data, collecting data, using data intelligently, and using that data to assist in the facilitation and also in the enforcement. Because I don't think any of us want to see dangerous goods entering the United States. So data. And then the second one is going to be entities. I think this year is going to be the year of entities. Who is importing? Where is it going? Who manufactured it? What country is involved? This entity piece is going to be a big regulatory issue in 2024. Mark my words on that one. Because as we get closer to knowing with whom we are dealing, in addition to the data that accompanies cargo, I think that's going to be a big one for us and something to watch. And then I think what's going to happen, and I know everybody talks about like artificial intelligence, and that kind of blends the two between the entities and the data. How are we going to use this huge quantity of information and the machines that we have to process this information? How are we going to intelligently make those connections and do both the enforcement and the facilitation, instead of relying on old think, which is like physical examinations of cargo? We have to look forward to how can we protect our country and also the industries that are in the United States. How can we do this properly using all the information that we have available? So that's sort of my thoughts. And Cindy, I don't know what your thoughts are, but that's what keeps me up at night.
I would say, that's very similar. One, I think, is the trend to enforcement. Kind of, you look at it more on a tactical side. I look at more of a what's trending, and I see a trend to enforcement. CBP, the legislation that's been introduced by the Hill, the enforcement actions that we've seen over the last 6 years, there is a heavy move to enforcement, and I really don't see an end in sight to that. As you said, no one wants bad things to come in to the country, but there has been very little facilitation that has gone along with that. It's all been enforcement oriented. The second thing is, the continued discussion around forced labor and other types of enforcement activities that, the ESG, the deforestation, all of those that are going to lead to needing to understand data more. I think the third one is Section 321 reform and the impact to businesses. The express industry really started a lot of the Section 321 business, but it's quickly outgrown express. The de minimis volume is by and large not in express and not in postal now. The majority of it now is through other means of transportation and other clearance methods handled by a broker for the most part. So I think that the trend of getting a handle on that, because CBP didn't anticipate that. I mean, the rest of the world kind of anticipated it. You and I, Amy and I would sit together at conferences, and I would have something on, and she would be like, "Where did you get that?" And she would be online ordering it as we're listening to a conference. So, and that was 10 years ago, right? So that was 10 years ago. So we could see it, and CBP didn't see this really exploding. And then automation in trade. Like Amy, I see a huge trend toward using automation to get everyone's hands around enforcement, some of the other actions, enforced labor, Section 321. Automation in trade is at the point where we were when we had ABI. When ABI was born. I look at ACE, yes, I was a huge part of my life and, it's still near and dear to my heart, but it was just a revamping of ABI. The real transformation happened when ABI was born, in the 80s, by the way.
And for those that that's the automated broker interface, right?
Yeah, that's what brokers use to transmit information to customs. And I remember when it was being made mandatory and brokers were saying, I'm never going to do that. I'm never going to be automated. They're going to put brokers out of business. They're going to put brokers out of business. Importers are going to do this themselves. And 50 years later, guess what? Brokers have still a very strong presence, file, north of 97% of all the entries in the United States, because we're very good at adapting to the market. And I think that we all are on the precipice of a massive change in how we do business. And that is because the automation is changing. And, some people are saying, oh, you can't automate this. We need the, the physical touch. You need this. I think looking at automation, our industry needs to say, this is another tool. How can I use this tool to be better at what I'm doing today? It's never going to be automated all the way through. Even if you look at the most automated processes in the world, like an automotive manufacturing line, there are still people involved in that because there are some jobs that machines can't do. But they use the tools in a manner that lessens the impact on them and on their business. So I think if we open our minds to look at technology and automation and see how it can help us and see how it can keep costs low enough where we can hire good people and pay them a lot of money, and have them do what they do best. And that means getting out of the data entry, which I don't think our industry ever was really a data entry industry, although a lot of the importers and a lot of the customs officers thought of us as data entry people. We make anywhere between 30 and 50 discrete decisions in any one entry. That's not data entry. Data entry is taking something on a page and putting it in and not making a lot of decisions. So I think really opening our minds to automation is going to be the next massive wave of change in the brokerage and importing industry.
Well, I will say, though, in tying this together, I think the scenario where, Amy, your point on, the data that is to be looked at and analyzed and utilized, that is where the enforcement is going to be perusing, if you will, in advance of some things. And so again, it's like I guess knitting a sweater kind of thing. These things are all kind of linked together and woven together. If you're going to be effective, if you're going to be that good corporate citizen and do the right things, the question's going to come into play here is, what is it that a company should be doing? A large importer, in this case, we'll talk about imports, that can share whatever information that will allow their goods to come through, hit the different algorithms if the data is made available, so that that stuff is looked at, verified, validated, moves on through, and then the CBP officers and other associated agencies can put their expertise on the goods that require their expertise, hence the higher risk things, or the first time importers, or something from an area that we've never known about. Is that something along the lines there of I mean, am I recapping this right, of what you're looking at now and where we need to move into?
Well, Andy, let me respond, because I think there are some things going on that are beyond old think. And the old think, I think Cindy just outlined. We had ABI, it worked very well, it served us very well. And it's still serving us well. But we have to now think ahead of, how can we satisfy all of these enforcement needs of customs and still keep our cargo moving? So one of the pilots that's going on right now And I find it an interesting one because it's different than anything we've ever done in the past. And that's like this distributed ledger technology. And I don't want to go crazy with this, but what it really does is it provides a platform for various entities who are involved in a specific transaction to lodge information very early in the process. We're talking maybe even at the purchase order stage, lodge information earlier in the process. And then as the goods are manufactured and move through transportation and other means on their way ultimately to a U.S. consumer, information is lodged in this system and made available to those who need to know it. The information or the data is what they call immutable. It's a fancy word, but it's supposed to be trustworthy information. So it becomes available to those who need to know early in the process, so that by the time the goods arrive physically on the shores of the United States, everybody who had a need to know or who had enforcement concerns or who had any other need to see this information that accompanies the actual physical cargo had this visibility so that decisions can be made immediately upon arrival. And this solves a lot of problems if it works. I mean, it's like pie in the sky a little bit right now because it's in a pilot stage. But if it works, maybe then people will be satisfied that this particular shirt is not made from cotton that was harvested in a region that is known to have forced labor, so that when it arrives, we don't have to have a withhold release order and have this cargo sitting someplace, getting demurrage and all kinds of other enforcement concerns because we don't know where it came from. So getting data earlier in the process from what we now call non-traditional parties. In other words, don't wait until the stuff is already on its way for the broker to transmit the information to customs. You had the information way, way, way early. I think that this might be a new way of looking at things and could maybe help with facilitation for those who are the honest players. And we want the honest players. We want to get rid of the dishonest players. We don't want them involved in our supply chains. Nobody does. So in answer to your question, if you have the opportunity to participate in one of these pilots, if you can start working with, if you're an importer, if you can start working with your sourcing entities to share information earlier in the process, and if you're willing to do that, if you're willing to sort of put it all out there, you may be able to be granted greater facilitation upon arrival in the United States.
I was gonna, and Amy, I was gonna say if anybody heard the episode with Vinny earlier this month,
Oh, I didn't.
or didn't hear it, let me just say, go back and hear that episode because he talked a lot about this and customs side of the data and the information and the sharing. Along with even Alan, he said, because of the federated data, you don't necessarily need to know the exact supplier that that we're dealing with. You just need to know what is involved in that process of that supplier, and it's federated so that you don't even need to worry about sharing your suppliers' names and information. But it is good. I just want to interrupt in that because everything. It's funny. I think that's the theme of 2024. I think you all are right. Is data because the first 3 episodes of this month, including yours, is focusing a lot on data.
This is actually, the beginnings of the progressive filing or facilitated entry or whatever name it actually gets. One of the proposals in the MOD Act, the new MOD Act that was introduced, was to allow non-traditional parties to file information earlier in the process. And that's something that, I've been wanting to do for 15 years, and the technology, as I said, when we talked last time, the technology just wasn't there. So it's been an ongoing conversation, and CBP now has the the technology to do it. And I think if we as traders take it to the next level, what can that be? What can that become? There are so many facilitation aspects to this that we can, kind of squeeze blood out of the turnip of enforcement language to get some facilitation benefits out of it. IPR violations, no longer an issue because you have that all the way back. Forced labor, you know where that's coming from all the way back to the origin. Free trade agreements, you now know and can prove this goes all the way back. And so all of that work that goes around importers trying to verify that the free trade agreement qualifications happen, wouldn't it be great if they could just file the data and CBP could accept it because they have awareness and visibility all the way back? What other things are out there? You aren't dealing with nefarious actors, because I think that this trend to enforcement and the more geopolitical issues that we have in the world are going to creep into our entry process. And we're going to have more and more and more burdens laid at the feet of customs brokers and importers alike to prove that they aren't doing something bad. And it's very hard to prove a negative. It's very hard to prove a negative. But what you can prove positively is where your goods came from and everyone that you do business with. So, that mapping, that understanding all of the parties in the transaction are really going to be critical in the future. And if we marry that concept that Amy is doing in the pilot with a facilitated entry with all of these enforcement needs, I think we have a good map for the future here.
Well, to your point here, let's talk about the information we're talking about here for a company. Breaking the stigma of saying, "Oh, we can't share this kind of information because it's proprietary." So, if I'm a company, one of the things you hit it early on, Amy, even with as simple as the purchase order. One of the things that Cindy, you were picking up on the IPR, intellectual property rights violations, the knockoffs, if you will, different things of those kinds of nature, is I know there was discussion at one point in time that here's the paperwork, here's the information on the shipment. Customs would look at it. Well, they don't know if that is a valid vendor of, let's say, Nike or Adidas or somebody like that. And so the scenario there is that if that information were shared earlier in the process, and that it would be made available on access, not that they have to peruse all that, but somehow, and this is where Burson was talking about, it's federated learning kind of scenario versus federated searching. But the point being is that information comes through. If a company is willing to share their purchase order information, here's the vendor, it's authorized, whatever, and it comes through, that could be matched up in an automated, using the artificial intelligence process as well as other automation, and match that up so it comes back to where customs looks at it and goes, okay, it appears to be a valid against their purchase order and whatever. Here's one that comes in. What is the I've just gone blank. The watches that are really big on IPR, the high-end watches. Rolex, yes. Yeah, the Rolexes. Yeah, me neither. But, Rolexes come in and whatnot, and, having that scenario there, man, they can hit that real quick. Well, they're doing that manually today. Whereas other things are coming in, and it's like, I'm just saying is that that's one of the examples, I guess, is if you're a company listening to this, as Amy said, if you get the opportunity to participate in a pilot program, you may not even be in it. You need to reach out to your compliance group and say, I want to see us get involved in that, because and push your regulatory affairs, push your legal folks and compliance to get involved, to break new ground, so that your goods, if you're doing and crossing the T's and dotting the I's, you need to be able to share information, but you're going to have to deal with your own internal bureaucracy and policies to open that up. Is that a fair statement, Amy?
Yes. And, one of the pilots that they could be involved in right now is the Global Business Identifier. As we mentioned earlier, entities are going to be important. So There is a pilot going on right now with CBP where they are trying to determine what is the best global business identifier to use to identify a company. And this is not limited to just importers of record, but manufacturers overseas and other entities, so that customs can verify or identify where goods are coming from. So that's just one. And a thing we haven't mentioned, Andy, at all yet, and I think we should bring this into our conversation, is all the other government agencies who have concerns about goods that are being brought into the United States. I can't even begin to tell you how much time we've just recently spent on whether or not fish is coming from Russia. You know, we've got 4 kinds of fish, and now everybody has to say whether or not there's any Russian content in this fish. And the only way that we're doing it right now is by a attestation, a piece of paper where somebody signs, I have no Russian content in my fish. And then we have to lodge this paper in customs. This is crazy. This is the way we used to do things in the old days. You know, we need to have a better solution. Organics, that's another thing that's now going to be dominating our thought. If your goods have any organic labeling or any kind of organic anything, you have to say whether it's really organic or not. I mean, I could go on and on with all the government agency requirements, FDA, our old standard, all of these additional data requirements so that the other government agencies, or what they call the PGAs, or partnering government agencies, so that they also can be satisfied. And it's got to be done in an automated way. It cannot be done with paper or pictures of paper. Because for me, if you have to write something on a piece of paper and image it, that is not automation. I'm sorry.
Well, that's what I always say. That's a 17th century process in a 21st century world. And it's like, that hard copy piece of paper, signing whatever. And just because you've signed it and whatever doesn't necessarily make it a valid scenario. It's like, okay, so there's a signature. How do I verify that? And that's kind of where we're going, is being able to look outside the traditional box and provide the information. So again, it facilitates the trade, but at the same time, takes care of those that are trying to do things right, but highlights, in my opinion, those that are not doing it right. And that's where the attention needs to go.
And Andy, I want to echo Amy's, in your recommendation that importers should get involved in pilots. And many times we hear, well, what's in it for me? What do I get out of this? And it's additional costs, it's additional work, it's additional information. So there's a real cost to participating in a lot of these pilots. And sometimes the pilots change. So if you're a technology provider, you're going to program for this and then it changes. There's another cost to that. But as an importer, one of the things that I used to talk about with importer clients was the fact that, customs sees this information. That's what the targeting system is. It's the largest mapping exercise that the government has. It takes all of the different information, and they've gotten better and better and better and better. Even since I've been there, it's been overhauled a couple of times. It's gotten better and better and better at linking the information that importers file with other importers, with their suppliers. So they have visibility now all the way back sometimes to the origin. And that's why seemingly they pluck these shipments out of thin air and say, there's an issue with this. Go look at it. Well, it's because they have that map on the back end. And for companies that provide that service, I know Burson works for Altana, is one of the companies he's affiliated with. They have a mapping. They have a mapping that shows all of those links. If I were an importer, wouldn't I want to know that up front? Wouldn't I want to know before the government does that I have an issue? And that's really one of the benefits of participating in a pilot, is getting the opportunity to see and develop how CBP is going to act in those instances where they find an issue. So I'm a huge proponent of that. If you don't want to participate in the pilot, I think it's important for importers to start looking at how they access their data all the way back to origin, and all, as Amy said, all of the entities that are participating in that, and search out a tool that can help give you that visibility, because customs has it now. they use like 5 different off-the-shelf tools that importers can now go buy themselves. So look at that because you want to know and understand your own risks and be able to mitigate them before customs does. And, brokers like Amy offer that service to their clients. That's something I do. I know, Andy, you work with importers too. We all serve a valuable service here in helping our importers see that value in the additional data. It's not just a cost, there's a value to it.
Well, one of the things too, I'll say is that, and again, I'm going to reach out to our listeners here for a minute, in particular, especially your leadership. If you're in compliance, you need to translate some of this up into a messaging to your senior leadership. But the senior leadership of companies and all that, this is one of those areas where when you're looking at having your company is searching for new vendors all the time, new sources for goods, services, whatever. In doing this, in this very thing, using this type of automation we're talking about, and artificial intelligence, to vet an entity. Just Amy, you hit the nail on the head, and when you were saying this is going to be the year of different entities. Well, yeah, the parties to the transaction, the manufacturers, the distributors, the transportation folks, and all that comes into play that are exporters or importers, and all that is before you even have a transaction. Is when you're vetting somebody, are you dealing with somebody that's credible or somebody that seems to have some gray areas in that? And even looking not only at the company name, but look at their addresses. And are there any nefarious things associated with the addresses of those locations? So there's a lot of complexities in this, but on the same token, I guess this is one where, if you do this up front, it's like you're working smarter and not harder from a standpoint of if you see some red flags, you may need to go to somebody else. But also that if you go down this road and you ignore some of these red flags and then you start getting into this, you'll have shipments that hit the ports that are either going to be held up or seized or something like that. Then you're going to be that proverbial pooper scooper at the end of a parade trying to clean this mess up. And I would rather vet this properly on the front end versus the back end. What do you think about that?
Sometimes I think our job is like you just said, the pooper scooper. Get in front of the problem. Work on your compliance before you start importing. And I think also, and I know it sounds self-serving, but it's really worthwhile to hire an expert to assist you in ensuring that you have good compliance standards within your company. It's just an ounce of prevention here because, as Cindy brought out, enforcement is on the rise. We've seen it. We see it every day. And by the time enforcement action has been taken, we have a real mess on our hands, and it's usually very costly. Holding the cargo is extremely costly, as people who have had their cargo held understand. So that doesn't even count the fines and the penalties that could cascade from one bad action. So getting in front of it and preventing these problems before they happen and working with experts who really know what they're doing, this stuff it saves so much in the long run. And you can just go on cbp.gov and do a little research, false claims acts, EPA investigations. And I know that sounds like a lot of alphabet, but it's worth investigating this on cbp.gov. Where are customs looking? What are they seeing? What are they finding? What are they seizing? If you look deep enough, you can find a lot of information and keep yourself out of trouble.
Well, ladies, I want to tell you, for the sake of time, we're going to have to wrap this particular show up. But I hope that you both will come back and we can talk a little bit more. I want to get into the Section 321 discussion and then jump in the middle of that one at some point. We don't have enough time today. But I also want to get into some of the other things, and especially the other agencies and things. But the one thing that I will say that I'm going to see and allow you to comment on this, let's say that a company, maybe they're considering maybe a pilot sounds good, but they're still not necessarily signing up for it. my suggestion at this point would be get involved with a trade association. I mean, if you want to educate yourself, ICPA is a good one. But if you want to be involved from affecting change, AAEI is another good one. There are trade associations specific to certain industries, the petroleum, the textiles, the footwear, all those kinds of things, the technology, and different things. Would you recommend that kind of stuff, as well as, I'm going to take it a step further, at least follow or link up with the NCB FAA, because there's a lot of great information that organization has, which is the Brokers Association.
I think absolutely, Randy, because the NCBFAA also has an education arm, the NEI, which has courses for everybody. You don't have to be a broker. And the other thing I want to give a shout out to is International Trade Today, which is a daily periodical that we receive. And if you're in the business at all of importing into the U.S., that's also a really good source to see what's going on, what rulings are new, where have there been enforcement actions. So, yeah, I mean, look, no one person can hold all the information. The world has gotten a lot more complex. So you need a good team and you need good resources.
You know, it's funny because one of the things that surprised me when I first opened my business was the amount of calls I got asking me, where should I spend my time? And where should I spend my money? You know, and I have a list of 17 different associations that have strengths and weaknesses and have a unique role, like the U.S. Chamber. The U.S. Chamber, for small businesses who don't have necessarily a voice in DC, it's a great avenue to understand what's happening in DC that could impact you from a business perspective. Also great if you're a large company and have the money and resources to participate at a higher level. NEI, always recommend NEI because they have just such a broad base of information. And I'm biased because I used to work at the NEI. I ran that for a few years. But I think it's you know, only gotten better with age and experience, and they have done so much. ICPA is great for, you know, mid-level understanding of the industry and networking. Those are the compliance people. Those are, you know, the networking opportunities. Cindy DeLeon runs the advanced topics in customs compliance, a little higher level. Usually it's the legal minds who speak at that, and very well respected, you know, individuals, very picky about, you know, who gets to give the information to the attendees, you know, fantastic former auditors. So if anyone who is involved in auditing at all, I always send them there. AAEI for the voice in DC again. You know, they're really great association of importers and exporters, although there's a large complement of service providers who help, you know, get that going. Those are the top ones. You know, there are regional associations. If you are a customs broker, look at your local and regional associations and get involved there. If you're an importer, there are foreign trade association groups, the Foreign Trade Association on the West Coast and Connect on the East Coast. There's a couple, you know, in the middle of the country as well. Fantastic resources. And because they are smaller, you have a better opportunity to have direct access to a lot of the information that is occurring there. So absolutely, you know, I attribute a lot of my career to being involved in associations because I had a lot of mentors, you know, kind of take me under their wing and say, hey, we're going to help you be involved. This is how you do that. And, you know, I have a tight group of friends that I've made over the years. Amy is one of them. You know, Amy and I have to tell a story real quick. Amy and I have been on so many panels, especially when Section 321 Type 86 first came out. They would put Amy and I on panels, and I would take one side and she would take another. And we'd, you know, almost appear to fight, and everybody would be like on the edge of their seat. And then we'd walk away and say, okay, what are we doing for vacation? Because Amy is one of my closest friends in the world. So we don't always see eye to eye in business. And there have been many times where like, blah, 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 blah. Okay, we have to stop talking about business. Okay.
I always compare that to the coyote and the sheepdog cartoon. Have you ever seen that?
Yes.
They clock in, Well, before they clock in, their buddies are eating, and then they clock in and they're at each other. See you tomorrow.
They clock back out and they're like, go home.
Yep.
Hey, I love it. Well, I've gotten to see some of that personally too. So it's like, it's always a fun time. So the one thing I will say in our industry, there is never a lack of opinions expressed, and it can stir up something. But talking about stirring up, Cindy, you are notorious for stirring up something and sitting back and watching the show.
Well, I learned from the best of them.
Yeah, there you go.
That's when the good ideas come out a lot of times. You just
they
have
really
to
do
about how you do that, because I have great ideas. Amy has great ideas. They aren't always the same, but they always come together and make something better.
Well, you know what? Listen, I hope, ladies, will you come back and participate in some more discussions? Because I think we've only scratched the surface on some of this stuff. You've loaded this up with a lot of things to think about. To our listeners, listen, we're going to have both Amy and Cindy's contact information and along with our own on there. By the way, too, as a resource, the Global Training Center, which is the sponsor of our show, is also a great resource as far as training and getting your staff up to speed. But all said and done, I will say, as we're looking at this, you probably are going to need to go back and listen to this again, because there's a lot of very deep, good information that we've talked about. And hopefully you can take this and translate that into your own company language and communicate it not only with your peers, but up the chain as well. So hopefully you can take some good action on this and make 2024 the year that we can see some great advances, not only in cargo security, in trade facilitation, but in compliance and make sure that enforcement wise, you're on the positive side, not the negative side. So ladies, thank you so much for joining us. And Lalo, anything else from you?
No, we do actually have one extra day this year to make things happen. So with leap year. So.
Oh, is this leap year?
Yes, it is. But anyway, no, thank you, ladies. Thank you for joining us, and for sure, open invitation to come on our show. If I don't reach out, or if Andy doesn't reach out to me and say, hey, we have something good that we need to talk about or whatever. So always our door is always open. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you both.
Y'all have a good day.
Thank you very much for joining us. Simply Trade is brought to you by the generous contributions of Global Training Center. You can follow the show and GTC on LinkedIn or Twitter and other social networks. Make sure you check out the show notes in the description for a full rundown of today's show with all the important links. Also, make sure that you share this with a friend and subscribe on your favorite streaming platform. We really like hearing from you. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to rate and review wherever you listen to this podcast. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the show, or would like to sponsor Simply Trade, or suggest any topic you would like for us to discuss, please contact us via email at simplytrade@globaltrainingcenter.com, or you can DM us on Twitter at simplytradepod. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. Happy trading. Simply Trade is not a law firm or an advisor. The topics and discussions conducted by Simply Trade hosts and guests should not be considered and is not intended to substitute legal advice. You should seek appropriate counsel for your own situations. These conversations and information are directed towards listeners in the United States for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only, and should not be substituted for legal advice. No listener or viewer of this podcast should act or refrain from acting on the basis of information on this podcast without first seeking legal advice from counsel. Information on this podcast may not be up to date depending on the time of publishing and the time of viewership. The content of this posting is provided as is. No representations are made that the content is error-free. The views expressed in or through this podcast are those of the individual speakers, not those of their respective employers or Global Training Center as a whole. All liability with respect to actions taken or not taken based on the contents of this podcast are hereby expressly disclaimed.